it's hard to be critically reflective. I think it's hard work. I think that we're not comfortable with it. As a human system, I mean, there's some that are exceptional at it, and I think you have to look for those role models. I think you have to look for those spaces where people are putting their practice of reflection publicly, like yourself, in a blog or as a speaker, showing humility, showing reflection, reflecting on past practice. The more we surround ourselves with those inputs, I think, for me at least, it gives me the strength and strengthens my own muscles to do that for others.
Just a little inside baseball. Here's how I go about booking people and having people on my podcast. I look for people I'm curious and interested in knowing more about. In some cases, these are people that I have some kind of connection with. In other cases, they're not. In this case, I knew Jenness, but I didn't know how well. I don't know. I wasn't sure of if she even knew who I was. Anyway, I reach out. She was gracious enough to say yes. I always do a little bit of a pre-call, so we talk and just to sort of find out what it is they would like to speak about, what things I'm interested in asking them about, put together some questions, then we book a time and record it. When I talked to Jenness, she said, I was just thinking about you, which is a weird kind of a way to start a conversation to somebody I haven't spoken with for years. But she was reflecting on this is her very first school launch as a superintendent, or rather, the first time that their district was going to be gathering in person since 2012. In 2012, I keynoted their opening day, and Jenness introduced me. I'd forgotten about that. And so she was thinking about it as she was preparing to keynote and launch their first St. James School Division's first whole staff gathering to launch a school year. So just a fun serendipitous kind of story. But Jenness is a wonderful conversationalist. I should have recorded our pre-call and also this call because there's so much good stuff in there. She's so open. She's so easy to talk with. And as you'll hear in our conversation, she just is super insightful, reflective, vulnerable, all the things I think people love in a leader, and she demonstrates that quite a bit. So I think it was just an exhilarating conversation that I had with her. And by the way, this is my second now Winnipeg-based leader that I've interviewed in recent times. Lisa Bowles, also rather new superintendent. And then there's also Sandra Herbst in Transcona East River. Sorry, probably getting the name wrong. I apologize. But kind of cool that Winnipeg is really upping their ante of females in this leadership position, which I think is fantastic given the fact that most of our employees are females. So why wouldn't we have female leaders? But just a fantastic human and a great conversation. So again, this podcast is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, who have brought all of these podcasts to you and allow me the time to record and put all these together for your benefit. So I hope you appreciate that. We're just doing in the midst of doing a lot of really creative work in places as we've been for 12 years. Amos told me the other day that since the launch of ALP, we have delivered over 24,000 days of professional learning. That's a lot. That's a lot of days over that period of time. Anyway, grateful to serve in all kinds of communities. So hope you enjoy my conversation with Jenness Moffat, Superintendent of St. James-Assiniboia School Division in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So Jenness, when we talked about having this conversation, you were quite excited, if I might say, about the opportunity to reflect. That was the first thing you said to me about, oh, this is going to be a great chance to reflect. I haven't heard that specifically from other folks that I'm doing this with, but why is reflection such an important part for you personally, and maybe in your new role as Superintendent CEO of St. James-Assiniboia School Division?
Well, thank you. That's it. What I love about it is just it's really about good questions. So I'm thankful for people who ask good questions. I think when you posed that question to me originally around, why is reflection important? I think when I look at my teaching experience, I really worked to ensure that I was asking students good thinking questions, right? Those higher order thinking questions where it's not about automaticity of reply, but it's about giving you that opportunity to really consider what we're asking, why we're asking it. And those thoughtful responses have always been the best moments in my classroom experience. And upon reflection, it has really transferred into my work as a principal over the years, working with teachers and posing really thoughtful questions, both, for others, but then you have to remind yourself that you have an accountability for your own reflection and your own I call it windows and mirrors, right? It's one thing to look into a classroom or to look into a situation, a school, and see what you feel you might want to know more about. But I also ask, what are you looking in the mirror and asking yourself about? And so for me, reflection has just been embedded in my practice. This is year 28 for me as an educator. And I think the more I have had the privilege of sitting in different seats around the table, the more that I notice, the analogy of your elbow partners have kept me accountable to my own reflection. But there are seats at that table where you have to work a little harder to find your elbow partners and to
Mm-hmm.
find people in your network that are going to pose those deep questions of you. And I believe these experiences, I have to look at my network as a superintendent a little differently, maybe, and consider the system. And that's not just, my school division, or my board or my colleagues in the Metro group. I see it beyond that. I think it transcends those boundaries and those catchment lines. And so for me to have an opportunity to speak with you coming from another provincial context and talking to leaders across Canada and beyond, I think that opportunity for me is just that accountability measure that I'm thinking and that I'm looking in
Yeah.
the mirror, considering my own practice.
Well, the other thing that I think about when I think about reflection and especially the way you described it is with these sort of complex and hard questions is it opens up the door to slow things down, right? Like I can't give you an answer to this right away because I need time to think about this, or that's a really good question. I don't know that I have the tools or the wherewithal at this moment to respond. And I wonder how that openness to complex questions, to pausing and slowing down influences culture. And I know I didn't ask you this or ask you to think about it, but it just made me think about, and I'll tell you a really quick story. One of the superintendents that I worked for as a teacher, and my wife, who is also a teacher in the division too, talked about this little, and I don't know if it was super tactical on his end, but he would, when he was in conversation with people, he would have this extra long pause after a statement was made. And it was slightly uncomfortable. However, it seemed to me in reflecting that he was taking time to actually process what a person said, and then would come back with perhaps a response or a follow-up question. But it was just, it's interesting how that set the tone for, because then I worked with him in other capacities in committees and so forth. And then I saw this sort of play out. But it just struck me, and I'm not sure where I'm going specifically with this question, other than to say, I wonder how your, because you think about this a lot, how you think that actually extends to not only your personal desire for accountability, if you will, but culturally, if deep and hard questions are part of the culture, what does that do?
Right. Well, I think you've just, brought up a really good opportunity to think about or to question the type of leadership we value. I think there's this belief that when you take roles and responsibilities that are, I'll say have an increase in responsibility in education contextually from classroom to school to system, to district to province, etc. I think the expectation is that you come with this, um, approach to leadership that and I don't know how it's been perpetuated over time. I don't know if it's just that sort of traditional model of that a leader knows everything. But when you give permission for that vulnerability, if you will, or the courage to just take time to walk away with a good question or a complex
Mm-hmm.
situation, to think about it more mindfully, or not as individuals, right? But with like,
Yeah.
I need to include my team on this, multiple perspectives. Um, I think that what we're honoring is that there is learning. When we say as an espoused theory, we are a learning organization, I'm not sure over many years of that perpetuated leadership belief that leaders know everything, right? And you're going to always have the answers. I'm not sure if we've really lived into that as a theory in use by way of us modeling learning and what that space, that liminal space between knowing how to give a quick answer and being okay with taking away or taking that moment to do some thinking, to be sure that when you are responding, you're using your words well,
Mm-hmm.
you're considering that real listening, that depth of listening. And I think it's a practice that I certainly do not pretend to have it, all figured out. But I do notice the expectations that can happen when you, as you say, that awkwardness that some people may have around you if you do pose a little bit of that discomfort
Yeah.
and that model that learning and listening mindset in a way where we're very used to, especially leaders, having those responses. And I think that in those spaces where that trust is high, those relationships are strong, I think there's higher levels of permission. No, but I would suggest to you that in some contexts, it's really just the culture of learning and how we all understand ourselves in relation to that.
Well, and I think the challenge that we face, like I'm thinking of school leaders in particular, teachers who the pace of a school day can be frantic, and you are making hundreds and hundreds of decisions all day long. Kids need this now, and you're doing this, and so when you're faced with in between the, may I go to the washroom? Can you help me with this? And when somebody asks a question in there that's like, "Ooh, that one's going to require more than just a quick response," how do we sort of break the script of addressing all of the and I mean, you have these questions too. I'm sure you're faced with lots of questions that are pretty simple to easy to answer. Yeah, no, we're going to do this way, or this is happening then, or that's. But it's also intertwined with a question that's like, whoa, I'm going to need some time to think about. And for me, when I think about reflection in my own, and for me, my reflection has been, quite public on my blog. I've used my blog as that one, but that always represents me. When I do my best reflection, it means I've read something, I've heard something, I've consumed some information that I now have to process, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just things that are inside my own head. That may be part of it, but it's an opportunity to say, I need more information. I would like to hear from other people. I would like to get and then I might be able to actually respond with feeling comfortable with what I'm sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just back to one other thing there too, is that there's a difference between reflection, I think, and being critically reflective. And I think that the times we're in right now are ones in which it is hard to put a mirror in front of yourself. I mean, who in the world wants to admit that, maybe you said something wrong or you did
yes.
something that was offensive to others, right? We're very protective of our, I mean, that's the reality. It's hard to be critically reflective. I think it's hard work. I think that we're not comfortable with it. As a human system. I mean, there's some that are exceptional at it, and I think you have to look for those role models. I think you have to look for those spaces where people are putting their practice of reflection publicly, like
Yeah.
yourself, in a blog or as a speaker, showing humility, showing reflection, reflecting on past practice. The more we surround ourselves with those inputs, I think, for me at least, it gives me the strength and strengthens my own muscles to do that for others. And so I'm always
Hmm.
grateful for people like yourself who put themselves out there in that way, put windows on their practice as they reflect in the mirror, because that to me is what our system needs more of.
Well, and quite frankly, it's easier for me in the sense that I don't serve a targeted community. I don't have a board of trustees that are watching me. I don't have a whole bunch of parents. I think it's very, and I admire, that's why I admire people like yourself who do it in various capacities, because I think, I think leadership in general is under attack. I mean, if you look at our political leaders, if you look at our, anybody that's serving in those kinds of capacities, I think leadership is tough because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. You can do the greatest thing in the world, and there's going to be a fraction of people who will see it in a negative way and challenge you and try to derail, even though, they may be representing, again, a small number, but because of the communication opportunities that exist today, that they can be very, very loud. And so, again, I think over time, what you're presenting is going to win. That's my hope, is that that deep reflection, even though it may bring with it some critique, and in some cases that's welcome. Like, yeah, I'm fine with people criticizing it if we do it in the right context. When I think about when you shared a little bit about your background and context, you as a child, anyways, moved around a lot, and so you didn't have any specific aspirations to stay where you are as long as you have. But how do you think that childhood of moving to different schools and just sort of not really having a home has shaped you as an educator and a leader?
That's a great question, because I think that for me, often when people, you interact with new people, they'll say, "Where are you from?" Right? That's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of our jumping spot when we want to interact with someone. And I've always had a really hard time answering that question, because I've had the great privilege of living in many different contexts here in Manitoba and northern Manitoba, central, south, and now in an urban situation. And so for me, I think that range of experiences. Once I was in faculty and learning the teaching, practice and thinking about where I might want to go and teach and learn, I originally thought we would go international, and ended up in a great community in northern Manitoba for many years. And I think for me, what I found early on, maybe in my growth and development, was those universal truths about what school really is. School is a place where no matter where I went, whether it was, like I said, in a rural context in northern Manitoba or southern Manitoba, no matter where I went, all I really wanted was that strong sense of belonging, connection. I think I found for myself through that experience how important community really is, and
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have to be there forever in order to get that sense of community. I felt really quickly those teachers for whom they wanted my heart before they wanted me to, do the hard work of learning with them. And so I learned really quickly what really matters is how you feel. If you feel valued, recognized for your uniqueness, your perspectives. And so as a teacher, I really translated that into how I felt I wanted to welcome, um, whether they be new students or students new to my classroom. As a principal, how I felt I wanted newcomers to feel when they came to register. And so I felt that I had walked not in the same shoes, but in similar contexts, for how it feels to walk into a new space and just know what you need to feel It's not about what people do for you. It's about how
Yeah.
you're left to feel. And so
Yeah.
for me, I think I've just really translated that importance of the relational experience. It's not about necessarily being from one place, but taking all those little places with you, right? And applying them to the space you're in right now. So we've been in Winnipeg for 23 years. I did not expect that. I love Winnipeg. I love our community, and I think that it's about growing those roots, but really it's about always consistently um, thinking about ways that you are meeting new people or stretching yourself to see another perspective or another way of being in our community. And
Hmm.
that's kept the novelty and kept the interest high to stay, because Winnipeg's such a beautiful tapestry of such a broad range of people from around the world.
Yeah. And, I think about St. James-Assiniboia School District and having worked and connected with people there for over a decade now. I think about, and I'll do a little name dropping, Andy McKeel and Darren Kurapatra and Tara McLaughlin, Andy Mead. And there's so many people who have been doing really innovative work. And I think about your school district as being a very, very innovative school district. But you also said, well, it has this rural feel to it. I mean, you're right in the heart of the city. No doubt. And so I don't know if there's any connection between that sort of rural feel, if you will, and the idea of innovation. Like how does that? I'm just looking at sort of what is it that you think brings about the innovative spirit that you have in your school division?
Yeah, another great question, Dean. Thank you. Because I mean, I really had to think a lot about that. And I think that, first off, we are the smallest, just for context, we are the smallest urban um, school division. So our next size school division is almost twice our size.
Okay.
Um, so with that context, I think that, yeah, you're right. Our community is quite small. Um, the relationships across schools and across the school division are very strong. And I can't speak to other examples in the metro experience. I would assume the same. But I think what speaks to um, that innovation and the culture of innovation, I think its roots, the more I reflect, and I had to kind of think of my own experience. Um, I've worked with many of those great people you mentioned in a variety of different roles, and I think it is that spirit of collaboration, right? And you can use that word once again as an espoused idea of being
Mm-hmm.
collaborative. But if I were to really look under the hood of our beliefs and our practices around collaboration, the thing for me that I wonder if it's common likely in many other spaces, but I think from us, I notice that it always starts with the learners. It's not about being innovative just to be innovative, right? It's about what do the learners need more from us, or what is the work we need to do right now? And it's always centered on our students. And I think that going back to one of the other turnkeys for success there is that I do see very deep care between our school teams and our students and families. Like,
Yeah.
again, the community is unique where we have some fairly significant geographical boundaries around us. We're kind of a little bubble, if you will. And so what happens is that you get to know families, you get to know the siblings, you get to go, it has such a strong community feel. It reminds me of small town living, actually.
Yeah.
It's probably why
Yeah.
we stay. What emerges is this shared understanding of how we collaborate. And I feel that um, innovation, similar to culture, it really it moves at the speed of trust, just to use those lines again. And I think that comfortable discomfort, as I spoke to about reflecting as a practitioner in a leadership level, it applies in the same context. When you have a network, a strong group of people who are feeling like the best thing they can do for their students and their families is to stretch themselves with some fresh approaches for teaching and learning to address a particular disparity that exists right now for our learners, or a particular need that the learners have. What happens for me is there's this energy, as you said, that brings people to try new things and take those risks. And that relational piece, both, across our schools with staff, as well as the relationship we have with our students, that deep care, I believe have been real fuel
Yeah.
for the culture that we have in our 26 schools, for us to be sure that we are constantly thinking about our practice in those fresh and meaningful ways. Change is no quick fix. And I think that when you say you see those pockets of practice or those little places and spaces where you have a mentor or a leader or someone who's willing to model what it looks like to try something new, and people get a window into that, and there's a lot of trust and respect for the person who is sharing out their practice or doing their thinking out loud of what went right, but also what went wrong or what they might do differently. And those practitioners you mentioned, those strong educators have long been mentors in our school division, and many teachers, not just new to the trade, but also, longtime practitioners who are taking that lead and who
Yeah.
are trying new things themselves because of that. So it's a long answer, but I think ultimately it rests on the way we define collaboration and why we collaborate.
Well, so I'm trying to tease out a few of the key like that trust factor. So like, I know even in my role right now, if somebody trusts me to try something, like I have this idea and I know that somebody is trusting me, and then I also know that they are willing to collaborate, or I can find others who I can collaborate with, so I don't take this journey by myself. And along the way, there's reflection, there's opportunity to say that didn't work. What's wrong with this? Like, I'm trying this, but I'm stuck here. Like, so many of those things are just are maybe they're obvious, but I don't think they are, in the sense that I know lots of organizations are missing a couple of those pieces. Maybe they have the trust, but everybody's so busy doing their own thing that's like, well, figure it out. Like, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Or they want to collaborate, but they don't really trust you. So they're taking, all of the, if one of those, that's like a flywheel. And if one of those is missing, you can get so far, but like, you need all of those pieces. And again, I'm trying to build my own little framework in my mind here. There's probably some other elements, but I'm just pulling out the things that you said specifically that I think are so critical for culture to work. Because again, culture is this sort of nebulous term that people throw around all the time. And like, I always want to know, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that look like? Like, even when we say words like trust, collaboration, reflection, we dove into reflection quite a bit as a term. But I think those other ones are also like we can throw those words around. And I mean, I just so appreciate the way you describe that, because again, I have context knowing the school division and knowing that, that actually happens, in many cases. So I think there's just powerful ideas that I think speak well of your school division.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And I think, really that is that opportunity for us to understand, how do we encourage those spaces where collaboration is taking place at those deep levels and where the trust exists? What are we doing to examine those pockets of practice or those spaces, so that we're understanding, like you say, what are those conditions, right? What's the difference between one space versus another, and why in some classrooms and not all? And I think that is really the problem of practice that, as a system leader, I bring forward to my colleagues, right?
Right.
And that is, how do you see change in a way in which it's both happening very organically, because teachers are responding to what the learners need and they're seeing themselves as learners and wanting to learn new approaches. But how do you lead that in a way where there's specificity, where you want change, right? We want to make sure we're monitoring our learners. What is the evidence saying about how our learners are doing? But still, and giving direction, right? And giving that I think it's the pressure and support to be able to say, so we've uncovered this particular issue. What is it that you're doing in your practice? What's your inquiry? How might you help propel change for these learners and these families? And here's what they're saying, or here's what we've noticed, or here's the patterns and trends. What more do we need to know? And so again, I think good questions really fuel the work. I think the more that the the experience of asking questions trumps having answers
Yeah.
or specific,
Sure.
I think we still need to be specific. We have a literacy strategy or we have a numeracy strategy, and this is why. But it's really about creating those questions or giving people permission to think about how might they walk away with that situation and apply some new learning and thinking in their space, whether it's a classroom or a school or whatever. But I do agree with you. I think that they're big terms. I think we throw them around a lot. But again, when you're given these gifts of good questions to reflect, I think you can define what collaboration means to you or what trust means to you. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just those really good opportunities to ask, how do I interact with that word, right? What does that look like here? And what might I want it to look like down the road?
Right. Right. So let's take let's just keep this going with a very specific example. So, we see the emergence of generative AI, and, people are embracing it or ignoring it or doing whatever. But here's a opportunity for leadership to help guide this. I don't even know whether the adoption is the right word, but I mean, just to acknowledge that it's there, and what are we going to do? So how do you sort of see leadership's role in supporting it and navigating the emergence of AI?
Yeah, I think it's just, it's another opportunity in our practice to ask ourselves why. Why might we want to understand what AI means for us in our practice? Because when we understand why we're learning more about it and its capacity and limitations, I think it's because we see it essential in our learners' lives, right? I was thinking about those kindergarten students that'll be entering school in the next week, and I think about their future 13 years from
Mm-hmm.
now and their next steps after high school graduation. And you can't help but predict that AI is going to be, and tech, leveraging digital learning and leveraging technology developments has been a part of my whole career. I mean, I started teaching when we didn't have computers in the classroom. I was using a typewriter to write out report cards, right? So if I look at the evolution of the internet and, then we went to mobile devices in some of our practice and, moved a lot of our suite into um, different platforms over the years. So learning, from Mac platforms to PC platforms and all these different learning curves that I've been on myself as an educator, I think that the future is really unpredictable for our next generations. And so with that said, I think we owe it to them to explore and play and understand. I think it's just another opportunity. It's not necessarily about AI for me. It's about another opportunity to think about how we may examine our pedagogy and our practice. One thing for me that I really want to think about through AI, and the thing as a leader I want to model, is what are our current forms of practice that AI might help address. So
Yeah.
when I put an equity lens on our classrooms and our schools, and I say that there are some wonderful and amazing transformations, right, that have happened for students because technology has been leveraged for them in the school and classroom
Mm-hmm.
environment. And so then we know that we have equity issues in our schools and in our classrooms and communities. So how might technology, specifically AI, address that? Because when we only look at it from, a part of me was I don't know what the right word would be, not judging it, but just feeling uncomfortable, I guess, with the discourse. Well, kids are going to cheat more, we're going to have all these essays generated. And I think, but no one's looking in the mirror to say, have you examined the question you're even asking the students to see if
That's
that
good.
question
Yeah.
is the right question? Because if
That's
they
right.
can go and have that essay generated using ChatGPT or Open AI in any way, shape, or form, are you sure that your pedagogy is actually in a your practice and your strategies are promoting that depth of level of thinking?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, kids, to me, it's not just about that. I think for sure we need to address some limits and some of those expectations on students. But to me, it's not about AI. It's about being responsible and interacting respectfully with tech. And when we think about, or digital tools, and when we think about, the evolution, kids have been, unfortunately, I even reflect on my own self. I mean, I remember when carbon paper, when you used to write your notes and then you would write for a friend so they didn't have to using the paper. So, that was our technological development
Right.
to achieve.
Sure. Sure.
So it's an age old challenge, right? And I think that the real questions are about engagement, the types of questions we're asking. So I think that's one superficial way to look at AI.
Yeah.
And once we get past that, I really want to bump it up that SAMR model and get to the modification and reimagination of how we consider teaching and learning, because I think AI can really leverage learning. I really see some power in
Mm-hmm.
there. I think that we can increase collaboration using AI. I see AI. I see the opportunities for it to, I think, increase participation and and even learning for students for whom maybe we aren't serving in the same way right now with our current practices. So I see it as a potential. Um, and I'm curious about that. I really don't have answers, but I think I want to lead. I'm really looking for thought leaders about it. I've listened to a few episodes, for example, of your podcast and others that are out there where we're considering this, and not just in an education context. I want to
Yeah.
think of it across society, across all of the different sectors who are grappling with this development and what it means. And so I'm just modeling that for me as a leader, and onboarding our administrators and our teachers to learn more about it themselves before we jump to those quick fixes or those quick responses
Absolutely.
of what we believe about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think this goes back to the very first thing we talked about, I think, is that desire and that disposition around reflection and around allowing, rather than rushing and placing judgment. And like, this is just a great opportunity. And I'm in the exact same position, saying like, I need to learn a little bit more about this. I'm not going to give you an answer right now. And yes, but at the same time, I think you've developed some foundational cultural things that I think will serve you well as you sort of continue to add this. And I know you've talked a little bit, we didn't talk about it today, but I know, truth and reconciliation and Indigenous learning is a big element of the school division, and people wrestling with the challenges that those things bring. So there's enough really tough things out there that I think if we don't have that sort of interest and curiosity, I think that's such a powerful thing. Well, I know I don't want to take too much more time. I know you've got a day to sort of continue on with, but I
Yeah.
wanted to always end with, I call these my fun questions. I don't know how fun they are, but they're maybe a little less serious than what we just explored. I think there's actually people who fast forward to these to find these ones. And I'm just going to warn you right now, you are at least the, I don't know, third or fourth Manitoban and Winnipeg person that I've interviewed. So I'm, especially the last question, I'll be curious to see if you come up with something slightly different. But let's start with the first one. What I don't know if over the summer you talked about having a little bit more of a reprieve this summer than you've had in the past. But so what are you reading or listening to? It could be professional, it could be personal.
So I have to laugh because these were the hardest questions for me to
Oh my
answer,
goodness.
because I am a voracious reader. That's number one. But I realize how broad I read. And so it's embarrassing to admit sometimes, right? What are you reading? I go to the little free libraries in our community all the time, and I find the oddest books. And I tripped upon the Judy Blume series that I read as
Oh,
a
fun.
teenager. And so I've been rereading those. And I'm on Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. And so, as funny as that sounds, I think for me, what I found by rereading some of those books that I can recall formative in my teenage years, what I'm noticing reading them in, the next half century, over the 50 mark, is just that reminder, right, of that universality of youth and adolescence, and
Neat.
reading those stories and listening to, and even remembering who I was at that age and stage, and thinking that there's still relevance now, all these years later. So that's
That's
kind of a fun
interesting.
little read. Yeah, that's been a fun little read. That was a nice surprise. And I think, on a professional front, I did pick up a book that's been on my shelf, and I think I've moved it about 5 or 6 times, different offices, but I don't know if I've sat down and actually read it cover to cover, and that is Fierce Conversations, Susan Scott. And so
Mm.
our team is walking through that book this fall. And so I'm really enjoying at this age and stage of my career in a professional way, looking at the book Fierce Conversations and thinking about how it applies to me in my current context, and really enjoying it.
Okay. Movies or binge series, guilty pleasures that exist there, or just a movie you watched or something? What's
It's in the building. Have you watched it yet?
yes,
It's on
yes,
Disney. Yeah. So we're
yeah,
really enjoying that. And I think just back to, I don't know what I used to watch Martin Short on SCTV, right? So
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
me, I
yeah.
just really
Oh, good for
love,
you.
I love the writing and the comedy. It's just, it makes me laugh. So that's been a bit of a guilty pleasure. I wait for those episodes to drop each week. And
Good.
I'm not much of a TV watcher, but I will say there's something to be said for these series now, through all these different broadcasts. I mean, I just don't turn my cable on anymore. I don't think. I think now you just jump right to those, HBO and Disney and Crave, and you can just find some really great little gems. And
Yeah.
so, Only Murders in the Building was one we tripped
Yes.
upon and are loving. Yeah.
Okay, real quick. I have a real quick Martin Short story. So I'm sitting in the Vancouver airport, ready to fly home, and I'm actually reading his biography or listening to it on my phone. And I'm sitting there, and I look up. He's sitting across from me at the gate. We're flying on the same flight. I literally am reading his biography. And I walked up to him and I said, listen, I don't want to be one of these people, but like, you wouldn't believe I'm actually reading that. And he went, oh, cool. Like, I know he thinks it was a setup, but it wasn't. I swear. I just like crazy. Anyway, fun story. And then my last question, this is the one I said I kind of warned you about. I'm coming to Winnipeg, and what are some sort of your sort of lesser known hidden gems in the city that I might want to pay attention to?
Um, you know, I I I really am proud of the development that's taken place in our. It's specific to St. James, but and that is Assiniboine Park. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people might drive by it and interact or think of the zoo, for example, but I live by the park, and so I've watched this unique development probably over the past 5 years of that space becoming just a real vibrant spot. So if someone were visiting Winnipeg, I mean, it's one thing to say, let's go to the park and think you're going to interact with the zoo, but we have this incredible new development called the Leaf. Many people are kind of drawn to it because its architecture is visible from many different places in the city. But inside that park are just so many unique offerings. Like, for example, you go for a bike ride and it turns out there's jazz, in the Leo Mo
Hmm.
garden. You can stop and listen to at least 2 nights a week. There's different music taking place. There's often something on the stage every summer. Summer series has different bands and ballet in the park and yoga classes. And so what I love about it is just this surprise that you walk into this green space, and there's all these different directions you can go.
Nice.
And I think I've just seen the development of this park in a unique way. And so I just want to invite as many people as possible who haven't interacted in that space to come back and revisit it, because there's a lot of things to see that are new. But it does give you, like, it is designed by the same designer as Central Park in New York City. And I find that really unique because when you come into that space, you can actually feel the same way you do at Central Park. It's very interesting. And I feel that for me, it's just this hidden gem. It's so simple, but sometimes you need a good tree bath. You just need to go walk on a
Yeah.
path feel at one with nature. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need to go connect with your community. And I noticed that the park has been really striving to do more of that, and notably post COVID, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's a little plug for me. The Leaf, the new sort of biodome that exists there, is worth seeing and feeling and experiencing, but so are the free garden spaces and the free developments around it.
And I wasn't aware because I just think of the zoo and stuff, and I remember taking the kids there when they're younger. But now that gets me excited to go check out the other places. So thanks so much for sharing that. And no one has shared that one, so that's a good one.
Okay, there we go.
Well, thank you, Jenness, for taking time. I know this is, as the school year launches, busy time of year, but you took the time to have this conversation, and I felt like we could have talked for another hour. Lots of interesting things to talk about too, but we'll wrap it up as we did. So all the best with the school year, and again, thanks for your time today.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you reached out, and I appreciate your show. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put on education, and I'm a big fan. So thank you for your work in influencing and supporting my leadership. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.